Since the 1979 revolution, the Iranian regime has built a powerful piece of propaganda around the concept of a fortress economy. For 47 years, they convinced the world and their own people that no matter how many embargoes or UN resolutions the West threw at them, the system could withstand the pressure and remain standing. That endurance relied heavily on turning sanctions into a paper exercise. When financial restrictions tightened, the regime moved its oil sales to the black market, relying on tankers that would swap flags mid-ocean and captains who would power down their AIS tracking systems to vanish from global monitoring grids. In 2026, the United States discarded those paper sanctions for a physical naval blockade. Helicopters now hover over suspicious vessels, dropping U.S. Marines directly onto the decks to halt, search, and seize any ship linked to the regime. A disabled transponder provides zero defense against Marines fast-roping from a helicopter, and a fake corporate registry is useless against overhead AWACS aircraft and satellite tracking. The U.S. Navy now identifies and boards tankers individually, physically stopping the flow of oil, regardless of what the paperwork says. With insurance policies canceled and Asian buyers pulling out of the market, the physical supply chain has reversed. The crude is backing up through the ports, effectively suffocating the country's oil economy from the coastline inward. This is the Strait of Hormuz, the primary exit artery for Iranian crude. By positioning its fleet here, the U.S. Navy has effectively sealed this narrow choke point, ensuring no unsanctioned vessel can pass into the open ocean. Looking at the port of Chabahar, you can see the failure of Tehran's primary Plan B. Developed to bypass the strait, it has become a graveyard of stranded tankers. Over 20 vessels sit fully loaded and stationary, boxed in by a naval wall rising in the Gulf of Oman. The regime expected that removing their supply from the global market would trigger a massive price spike. They believed that a high enough price per barrel would allow them to fund the government, even if they only managed to smuggle out a fraction of their usual exports. That leverage was neutralized when the United Arab Emirates made the decision to exit the OPEC cartel. By abandoning production quotas, the UAE prepared to flood the market with an additional 1 million barrels of oil every day, keeping global prices low despite the blockade. This is the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline. It carries nearly 2 million barrels of oil a day directly to the Gulf of Oman, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Because the UAE controls this route, they can supply the oil the world wants, while Iran's routes remain physically blocked. This dual-front loss is devastating. The UAE's strategy simultaneously crashes the global price of oil and absorbs Iran's lost market share, leaving Tehran with no revenue and no geopolitical leverage. With exports slashed by 70%, the excess crude has nowhere to go. Millions of barrels are now backing up into Iran's domestic infrastructure, filling every available tank on their shores. In a desperate attempt to create space, the regime has started pumping crude into half-rotted, scrapped ships. These decaying vessels, incapable of putting to sea, are being used as floating storage units just to keep the oil from backing up into the pipelines. This creates a terrifying temporal constraint. Analysts estimate that Iran has only 12 to 22 days of unused storage capacity left. Once that window closes, the entire system reaches its physical limit. When storage hits 100%, active oil wells must be forcefully shut in. In petroleum engineering, this can cause irreversible production loss, as the change in pressure permanently damages the well's mechanical integrity. Experts estimate Iran could permanently lose up to 500,000 barrels of daily capacity this way. This makes the blockade more than a temporary financial shock. By forcing the shut-in of these wells, the U.S. is executing the permanent destruction of Iran's future industrial potential. The logistical collapse is now hitting the regime's finances, with $13 billion evaporating from the state ledger every single month. That loss of capital is starving the resistance network Tehran spent 40 years building. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is reportedly struggling to pay basic salaries. In Yemen, the Houthis are limited to their remaining drone stockpiles. As the funding dries up, Iraqi militias have begun a quiet retreat from the field, marking a visible decay in Iran's regional military reach. The domestic economy is fracturing under the weight of 40% inflation. The Iranian rial has plunged to nearly 2 million against the dollar, and as prices for imported medicine and food surge, the lines for basic staples like bread continue to grow longer. The desperation reached the highest levels of government when President Masoud Pezeshkian went on state television to appeal for help. He took the humiliating step of asking citizens to turn off their lights, suggesting they use 2 lamps instead of 10 to prevent a total power grid failure. Iran's military deterrence was built on a financial artery of oil revenue. By severing that artery, the blockade has dismantled the IRGC's ability to project power abroad or maintain the social contract at home. Internal assessments from the Supreme National Security Council suggest the private sector could lose 2 million jobs by the end of spring, creating a massive new wave of economic refugees within the country. The council reached a stark conclusion. The regime can withstand this physical blockade for a maximum of 6 to 8 weeks before the internal system shatters completely. Security officials have documented that under this level of economic pressure, massive public unrest is inevitable. They are no longer asking themselves if protests will happen, but exactly which day the streets will explode. The regime now faces a choice between a total nuclear surrender, the violent internal collapse warned of by its own Security Council, or a direct military strike from the U.S. 47 years of resistance have collided with the reality of a physical blockade, one that replaced financial paperwork with the literal